This Saturday, students across the country will participate in the March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C.
It is a protest calling on politicians to enact stiffer laws when it comes to gun control. Here in Hampton Roads, local students plan on having their own march. Robert Boyd talked to them.
Tonight, students from across Hampton Roads were coming together to make signs and posters for this weekend's march. They say you're never too young to voice your opinion. Students were painting for a cause close to their hearts in Virginia Beach Thursday. With each stroke of the brush, there is a powerful message being written.
Never again until it happens again.
Grassfield High School senior Jordan Gabrick mocking those politicians who he says were all talk and no action following last month's school shooting in Parkland, Florida.
The fact of the reality is that these things can happen at any time, any place, and that it's really important that there is change so that these things don't ever happen again to anyone else.
At another table, magic markers were being used to put more thoughts on poster board, like enough is enough and am I next? Students say every time there's a school shooting, it sends a wave of panic throughout their classrooms.
Every time it happens, everybody feels really emotional and touched by it because you just think about that could have been our school and that could have been us.
These students plan to hold these signs high above their heads as they march through the streets of Norfolk on Saturday. More than 2,000 people have already RSVP'd.
I think it's super important that we're having these satellite marches. It shows like the solidarity across the whole nation for the victims of Parkland and just for gun violence.
Caitlin Montessori and Maddie Anderton of First Colonial High School are responsible for organizing the bulk of the march, with some input from local group Indivisible 757.
This was absolutely student run from the beginning. Of course, we had help from people who know what's the ins and outs, but this was all student led. It was really important to us to get our voices heard and to push for some sort of change.
March for Our Lives is scheduled to begin at noon on Saturday at Town Point Park in downtown Norfolk. This is Robert Boyd, 13 News Now.
We have a list of the local events. You'll find it in Robert's story on our homepage. March for Our Lives may turn into one of the largest marches in history. Teens have been pulling all-nighters and petitioning city councils, raising more than $4 million in the movement. Organizers say they are expecting up to 1 million people in Washington, D.C. this Saturday. Teens walking alongside pop stars Ariana Grande, Jennifer Hudson, Miley Cyrus, and Demi Lovato. More than 800 affiliated marches are planned from California to Japan. Tomorrow, Senator Tim Kaine will use Skype to talk to students in Norfolk about gun violence. A few weeks ago, students from Granby High School sent letters to Kaine saying they were concerned about school safety after recent school shootings. Tomorrow morning, the senator will take their questions about what can be done to make the schools safer.
Heartbreaking update to the school shooting this week in Great Mills, Maryland. Tonight, the mother of a teenage girl who was shot says her daughter is brain dead and will be removed from life support. Authorities say 16-year-old Jalen Willie was shot Tuesday by a classmate, 17-year-old Austin Rollins. A school resource officer fired at Rollins after the shooting, but it is not clear whether Rollins was killed by the officer's bullet or whether the teen took his own life. Also new tonight, the Mandalay Bay Casino has released surveillance footage that shows Stephen Paddock's actions before the mass shooting in Las Vegas. 58 people died and hundreds others were injured. Paddock is seen gambling on the casino floor and tipping bellhops for wheeling large bags of luggage up to his suite. Reporter Darcy Spears talked to an expert about Paddock's behavior.
A telltale facial expression and anxious elevator behavior. Both jumped out as signs to body language expert Dr. Jack Brown that something was not right with Stephen Paddock.
There's not any one thing that says this guy's a killer or whoops, this is an absolute call to police right now kind of behavior. But there are definitely anxiety tells in abnormal behavior to the point where, you know, it depends on your screening level.
Meaning how much attention was being paid by those watching Paddock's movements at Mandalay Bay, if anyone was watching the high roller as he came and went over days, gambling all night long and carting in load after load of luggage.
He seemed like he really went out of his way to make it look casual, take up the luggage. Not all at once in multiple trips. He really planned it out.
Dr. Brown also noticed Paddock's elevator behavior.
He's got his legs crossed and he's his center of gravity is way off.
which he says might not seem abnormal at that moment, but in hindsight shows significant anxiety. In this video clip,
he's got his hands in his pockets and he's doing this. That's significant for anxiety.
And while the behavior itself isn't necessarily incriminating, Brown says it's all about the context.
And that's particularly the elevator thing was extremely out of context.
Once inside the elevator, he notes how multiple times Paddock backs into the corner, even though he's alone.
And the corner he chose was a corner with the camera, such that the camera showed the top of his head and not his face. Even if there wasn't a camera, that's odd behavior to go in the corner of an elevator. That might be something, if I was screening for potential nefarious behavior, that I would look for.
Darcy Spears reporting. She says MGM released a statement saying Paddock was a longtime guest with no known history of threats or violence, and there was no way they could have foreseen his actions.
A school janitor is sentenced for selling drugs at a Newport News elementary school. 28-year-old Aaron Williams was working as a janitor at Sedgefield Elementary. Newport News school officials confirm he worked as a custodian from 2010 until September 2017. According to court documents, Williams sold heroin on school property back in October of 2016. Williams was sentenced to 21 months in prison. A second man worked with Williams selling heroin in Newport News and Hampton. Scott Fletcher was sentenced today to more than 5 years in prison.
Virginia Beach Public Schools could become the first district in Hampton Roads to do away with class rank. The district says students are putting too much emphasis on weighted classes in order to boost their ranking instead of focusing on a well-rounded high school experience. The district is thinking about dropping the current system for a Latin honor system, measuring students in their tiers based on their GPA, such as cum laude and magna cum laude. Out of more than 1,500 parents surveyed, more than 70% were in favor of the change. Many principals also agree, saying class rank is unnecessary.
It becomes almost, for some, an unhealthy obsession. And I just, I think of some students and I just wish that they would slow down a little bit and start to focus on some other things, not purely academic in the way of class and books, but some of the other extracurricular activities or some of the things that kids are supposed to be enjoying at the age that they're in high school.
School board could vote on this to eliminate class rank as early as next month. It would go into effect beginning with the freshman class of 2022.
A former Hampton police officer has been arrested. Federal authorities say D'Angelo Freeman conspired to deal heroin and cocaine and told his co-conspirators the identity of a confidential FBI informant. Freeman is accused of plotting with 6 people in a large-scale drug trafficking operation here in Hampton Roads. Freeman started as a patrolman with the Hampton Police Department back in 2010. A spokesman for the division said Freeman separated from city employment last November. That is when the former officer was indicted. Freeman faces a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years and a maximum of life in prison if convicted.
Tonight, President Trump announced he is replacing National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster with John Bolton, a Fox News contributor and former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Bolton will take over April 9th. Tonight, the president tweeted that McMaster has done an outstanding job and will always remain my friend. McMaster is a 3-star general. He took the job after the president's first National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, resigned less than a month on that job. Flynn is awaiting sentencing for lying to FBI agents about his contacts with Russian officials.
The Dow made another record plunge today on Wall Street. It happened just hours after the president announced his plan for tariffs on some Chinese goods. In response, tonight, China announced a list of U.S. goods, including pork, which may be hit by higher tariffs. ABC's Maggie Rulli has more.
After spiraling all day, the Dow closed down 724 points, dropping nearly 3%. That makes it the 5th largest point decline in history. Now, analysts point to nervousness on Wall Street for the plunge and say there are 3 major concerns. First, they're looking at Chinese tariffs. Now, just hours before the closing bell, the president announced these tariffs, saying he's going to slap a 25% tariff on up to $60 billion of some Chinese imports. There are concerns that China could respond with tariffs of their own own, possibly even starting a global trade war. Secondly, we're looking at tech concerns. Facebook right now is caught up in a privacy scandal, and many restrictions are being called for not only on Facebook, but on other tech giants like Google and Twitter. Lastly, we're looking at rising interest rates. Now, earlier this week, the Fed hiked those rates, and that's going to lead to more expensive loans, meaning things like your mortgage, your car loans, or your credit cards could all become more expensive as well. Now, despite all of these concerns, many investors say do not worry just yet, that the plunge today is more of a correction like we've been seeing since February, and many insist we are still in a bull market. Maggie Rulli, ABC News, New York.